it's really great being here. I had no idea that this place didn't even existed until Mark got in touch with me a few months ago. But it's just the hospitality here. You guys are all really warm and friendly, and it's been a joy. So my teaching style is I have a lot of material that I go through. Sometimes I go fast, sometimes I go slow. Please bear with me. And I sometimes repeat things, and I do that because people don't always hear it the first time. So here we go. This is our Rochester Lifestyle Medicine Institute's wellness wheel. So we have 9 pillars, and the first 6 over here are plant-based diet, activity, avoiding toxins, restful sleep, managing stress, and having healthy relationships. And those are the same things that are promulgated by the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. It's kind of obvious, right? We've added 3 more, enjoying nature, finding purpose, finding joy, and then, of course, we advocate the whole food plant-based diet, which is really, I mean, all these pillars are important, but the one thing that people, I think, need the most convincing on is diet, because there's so much information, misinformation, disinformation out there about diet. So we focus on that, and then what I also find interesting is enjoying nature. The American College of Lifestyle Medicine is now considering adding that as their 7th pillar, so we're already ahead of the game. And my wife and I are full-time volunteers. Mark was saying that we're a nonprofit. We are. I make my living working as a diagnostic and interventional radiologist. Rochester Lifestyle Medicine does pay their staff. We have 10 full-time and part-time employees. And we have a physician medical director who's not me anymore, which is great. And we have a physician director of clinical studies. So we're very much immersed in the establishment of medicine. We feel that's very important. We are trying to operationalize plant-based nutrition in a broken system. So our mission is to establish lifestyle medicine, especially the adoption of whole food plant-based nutrition as the foundation of health and the healthcare system. And we do that by educating as many medical providers as we can about the benefits of whole food plant-based living, and by reaching as many individual participants as possible, which results in more practitioners being educated about it. Because what happens is these people go back to their doctors. I'm sure many of you have had that experience. Your doctor says, wow, what are you doing? And you say, oh, I just adopted a whole food plant-based diet. And they say, oh, it sounds interesting, maybe I'll try it. So what would that, if we're successful in our mission, what would happen? What would that accomplish? Well, we'd have better health for all. We'd have a longer lifespan and health span for everybody, and a healthy planet for all of those healthy people. Because one of the things that we are really facing now is the specter that we could end up on a planet that really can't support humans. And the beauty of this is that a whole food plant-based diet is really one of the best things you can do for the planet. We are, just as I mentioned earlier, we're a nonprofit. I'm just going to go through this quickly. But we have received money from Nutrition Facts, which is Michael Greger, T. Colin Campbell, you probably heard of him, Veg Fund, National Advocacy Organization, and Physicians Committee actually has helped us start a lifestyle medicine practice at Highland Hospital in Rochester. And then we have very generous donors, so ask if you want to help us out. We'd love it. These are this is a picture of just one of a screenshot of one of our web pages, and shows all the different programs that we run. The Jumpstart program is our main thing, and I'm going to kind of skip through all these, but we just have a lot of stuff going on, which is why I'm so grateful that we have a new executive director, because my wife and I were kind of managing all this ourselves. Our 15-day whole food plant-based Jumpstart has been live now since 2018, and we just launched the on-demand version of it. It's now available because people can't always make the Zoom meetings that we have. And I'll talk a lot more about that later. I'm only showing this because I want you to see that we have CME programs. So for those in the medical profession, you know that means continuing medical education. So we're the only organization in the world, as far as I know, that actually gives medical credit to doctors and healthcare professionals for going through a program with patients on Zoom, which is pretty remarkable. And it's helping them to learn how to run shared medical appointments and to learn about plant-based nutrition at the same time. So I want to talk about something called the Overton window. Has anybody ever heard of the Overton window? It's a pretty interesting philosophical concept. So understanding the range of acceptable political ideas. It was developed by Joseph Overton in the mid-1990s at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy in Michigan. And the Overton window represents the range of policies considered politically acceptable by the public at a given time. So you may have an idea, but it's so far outside the Overton window that no one's ever going to accept it. So, so the window can shift over time, so as public opinion changes. So for example, well, I'll give you examples in a minute, but policies must fall within the Overton window to be politically viable. Organizations can influence the Overton window by promoting ideas strategically, And media and social institutions play a huge role in shaping the Overton window, because what people in the, out there think is influenced by what they're hearing. So here's some examples. Abolition of slavery. Back in the early 1800s, slavery was kind of normal. In fact, for a lot of human history, slavery has been normal. But the Overton window shifted, and we had a civil war, but we got rid of slavery. The women's right to vote, which is only since 1918. My mother was 2 years old when women were able to vote, given the right to vote. And environmental protection, same-sex marriage. I mean, remember how in the early 2000s that was just not unthinkable, and all of a sudden it exists. And we're very grateful because our 32-year-old son is in a same-sex marriage. And then plant-based diet. That's another thing where the Overton window is shifting. So it's a useful concept for understanding shifts in public opinion and political acceptability. And it highlights the importance of public discourse and the role of various actors in shaping policy debates. So, moving on, like any good parents, my wife and I performed an experiment on our children. In 1991, we decided to become vegan. We did it for the planet and all of its inhabitants. I was really interested for environmental reasons. My wife was interested for the animals. And at the time, as a physician, I wanted to make sure it was safe and healthy. But I set the bar extremely low. I just said, well, it just has to be no worse than the diet we're on now. And then I, of course, found out that we quickly learned about the health benefits of a whole food plant-based diet, and then it's far superior to what we had been eating and what most people on the planet are eating now. So here they are back in 1990 before we became vegan, and here we are in the Galapagos Islands. Everyone here is vegan, including the tortoise. By the way, I'm using the vegan word. I know I have to be careful about that sometimes, but we'll talk about how that all fits into whole food plant-based later. Here we are crossing the Panama Canal. My wife doesn't like to travel. This is how she gets a break. So here we are at a wedding back at home, and everyone was worried about this little guy. Nate, they said, but isn't he too short? You're not giving him any meat. What's going on here? So he grew. So there he is a couple of years later. And there they are, all plant-powered, continuing plant-powered. Can you see this well enough because the lights in? Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, and then our son has also got 2 Grammy Awards. So, yeah. Yeah. So he's part of a professional choir that's based in Philadelphia. He lives in LA now, but he travels back to when they make their albums. And so anyway, that's about my family. Quickly, just a bit about me, the high-tech doctor with low-tech solutions. That's one of my high-tech solutions. That's a balloon angioplasty. That's an angioplasty balloon for opening up arteries. But this is broccoli. What do you think is better to keep your arteries open? In the long run, broccoli is. Now, a balloon angioplasty will get your artery open a lot faster, like instantly, but it doesn't last as long. Which one do you think costs more? Broccoli. Yeah, broccoli. Yeah, it's getting that way, yeah. Which one do you think has more lobbyists? That's really the question. And it's got the 3-piece suits. So anyway, so high-tech empowers the medical industrial complex and is extremely expensive. Low-tech empowers the patient and is inexpensive. Drugs and high-tech treatments often have negative side effects, whereas lifestyle or low-tech interventions often have positive side effects. High-tech makes a good living for its practitioners, whereas low-tech practitioners starve. But we're working on that. Okay, I now have a video to show. So this is,
If you suffer from the side effects of pharmaceutical commercials, including nausea, headache, vomiting, frequent trips to the pharmacy, or an overdrawn bank account, then Wafiqben may be right for you. Side effects for Wafiqben may include curing type 2 diabetes, reversing heart disease, weight loss, cholesterol reduction, easing of stress, lowered blood pressure, reflux abatement, erectile function, clothing size reduction, regular bowel movements, smiles, vacations, good health, and children with puppies. Ask your doctor if Wafiqben is right for you. Wholesome foods, plant-based nutrition. Maybe our ancestors did know the secret to good health.
So you'll notice at the bottom it says teaching skills, not selling products. That's something we have in the footer of every one of our web pages. Because I'm not saying that sometimes supplements don't help, but we don't sell them. And we'll tell you if we think you need a supplement, just go to the drugstore and buy it, or the health food store, whatever. We don't want people to think that any of our advice has anything to do with us actually making money. So this is a talk about medical paradigms and how hard they are to change. So we've got 4 medical paradigms we're going to talk about today. We've got hand washing, radical mastectomy, ulcers, and cardiovascular disease. So first we're going to talk about hand washing, and I'm probably going to go fast because I feel like I'm a little bit behind here, but that's okay, we'll catch up. So anybody know who this guy is? He's the guy who invented hand washing. And he was working at Vienna General Hospital as a young man, and this is just how medical paradigms die hard. So his name is Ignaz Semmelweis. Anybody heard of him? I love this audience. Usually I'm going to give this talk. Everybody raises their hand. They already know. They know what I'm going to say. This is cool. Okay. He lived. He died in 1865, and he's the one who said, "Wash your hands." Why did he do that? He said that in 1847. He got hired because at the Vienna General Hospital to help out with this outbreak they have, or this epidemic they have of puerperal fever, where women would come in and deliver a baby, and then they would die from strep pyogenes or puerperal fever. They didn't actually know what was causing it at the time, but that's a little picture of what the strep bacteria looks like. And there were 2 obstetrical wards at Vienna General Hospital, and there was the first clinic had a death rate of 10%. The second clinic had a death rate of 4%. Now, can you imagine it? Either of those nowadays, right? That was for every woman who came in and delivered a baby, there was a 10% risk of death in one clinic and 4% in the other clinic. Now, one of the clinics was run by midwives, and the other was run by doctors and medical students. Which one do you think had the 10% death rate?
Doctors.
Right, the one with doctors. The second clinic had a 4%. What do you think was the difference between the 2 clinics? They washed their hands. You know what? Nobody washed their hands back then. Not even the nurse midwives. Okay? But there was a 90% drop in deaths after initiation of hand washing. So if nobody was washing their hands, what was the difference between the 2 clinics? Well, the medical students and doctors, after a patient would die, this is kind of horrible, they would go into the morgue and do an autopsy. And they didn't wear gloves. And then they'd go back up and take care of women in labor. So puerperal fever got transmitted that way. So the lesson is wash your hands after you do an autopsy. Please. I know this happens all the time here. Don't do that anymore. But hand washing didn't become standard in hospitals for many years after because nobody believed him. They thought in fact, they were insulted. A well-known obstetrician at the time is quoted as saying, "Doctors are gentlemen and gentlemen's hands are clean." Unfortunately, so it worked in practice. We knew it worked, but we didn't have a theory for why it worked because Pasteur and Koch hadn't figured out about microorganisms and germs, basically. So the germ theory of disease wasn't around yet, so there was no reason to think that there was no theoretical explanation. It worked in practice, but not in theory. We really should be doing things the other way around, right? We have evidence that things work. It doesn't really matter what the reason is. We don't have to have an explanation if we understand that they work. So anyway, he got pretty upset, and I'm going to just jump ahead here. He got committed to an asylum, and he died there after probably being beaten by guards. His practice earned widespread acceptance only years after his death when Louis Pasteur developed the germ theory of disease, offering a theoretical explanation for his findings. He's considered a pioneer of antiseptic procedures. So that's paradigm number 1. And now it works in practice and in theory because now we have a theory. Oh, I see why washing hands helps, because it washes off the germs. So, when did we start to routinely wash our hands? Anybody know? Surgery, 1875. So 1847 was when Semmelweis came out. It wasn't until 1875 that surgeons were actually washing their hands. They weren't wearing gloves, but they were washing their hands. Routinely at hospitals, it wasn't until the 1980s. I can remember when we started washing hands between patients. And restaurant workers, 1990s. All right, radical mastectomy. What about that? So this is from a textbook, How to Do a Radical Mastectomy. And we know that it is a treatment for breast cancer, but it has terrible side effects. So this is what's called post-mastectomy lymphedema. You can see this is the woman's normal arm, and this is the arm that they've actually done a lymph node dissection. They removed all the lymph nodes from her armpit because the idea was you would stop the spread of cancer that way. And here's another woman over here with, you can see she's had a mastectomy, and this is a very swollen arm. And so the radical mastectomy was developed in 1894. Well, it was developed before that, but it was published in 1894 by Dr. William Halstead, who was in Baltimore, and he published 50 cases performed at Johns Hopkins, and he has a great pedigree. He's actually a great surgeon. He trained at, and he went to Andover, Yale, Columbia, Hopkins, and he's considered a father of much of modern surgery. It was the standard treatment for breast cancer from 1894 until the 1970s. I remember when I was a medical student. I graduated from medical school in 1980. And Halsted's procedure persisted among physicians in the United States for a very long time. It was not until 1951 that another cancer surgeon seriously challenged Halsted's underlying assumptions. Ian MacDonald, a Canadian teaching in Los Angeles, argued that radical mastectomy might not be necessary for all women, especially those with slow-growing tumors. So the idea here is, it's not that we're going to save everybody. We're not, right? But it might be that we don't have to do all these terrible things, and we'll still get the same results. It may not always be a great result, but it isn't any worse than doing the radical mastectomy, which is really, pretty disfiguring and debilitating. So relatively few surgeons supported his MacDonald's idea. One of them was George Barney Creel, whose father, also a cancer surgeon, was renowned for describing in horrific detail the effects of radical mastectomies on his patients. Now, they were at the Cleveland Clinic. Have people here heard of Caldwell-Esselstyn?
Yes.
Okay, I know a lot of you in this. So you're going to hear a connection here. Both father and son practiced at the Cleveland Clinic, and Barney Creel was Caldwell-Esselstyn's father-in-law. So Caldwell-Esselstyn is married to Anne Creel, and you'll hear more about them later. Medical history right here on our stage. So in the early 1950s, Creel became the first surgeon in the United States to offer women a choice: radical mastectomy or simple mastectomy. He performed his last radical mastectomy in 1954. Now, radical mastectomy is opposed to includes removal of all the muscles underneath the breast. So you're seeing ribs, is removing the lymph nodes in the armpit, very disfiguring and debilitating. Whereas a simple mastectomy is just removal of the breast, which is really just an organ of the skin. It's not debilitating, really, to have a breast removed. Your muscles are still intact. You still have lymph node drainage. And it can, remove the cancer. He was praised for his actions by a small but vocal group of patients, and his less extensive simple mastectomy was vigorously attacked by his colleagues, some of whom considered it equivalent to malpractice. So he was attacked a lot for that, but he persisted. And by the 1960s, the lines were drawn. Surgeons were either for or against this procedure, citing published case reports based on their own subjective clinical experience. At the same time, breast cancer patients increasingly began to question the efficacy of the Halsted procedure, the radical mastectomy. And another group argued that the only way to objectively determine the effectiveness of radical mastectomy was through a randomized clinical trial, a relatively new concept at the time. So randomized controlled trials are considered the gold standards now, but people were suspicious that you could do that back then, which isn't that long ago, right? So in 1971, the first randomized trial was started in America that compared radical mastectomy with simple mastectomy, or simple mastectomy followed by radiation therapy. And so it was published in 1974. And the early results, based on findings from 1,700 patients at 34 institutions, showed that the survival outcomes for patients was the same, regardless of which type of treatment was performed. So why do the disfiguring, debilitating one, right? So despite the mounting evidence to the contrary, many surgeons continue to advise their patients that the Halsted procedure was, in their opinion, the safest treatment. I still remember this as a medical student in surgery and as a resident when I went on the surgical team. That was always, up on the chalkboard, and as they were handing out assignments for the day, which surgeon you're going to assist with. There was radical mastectomy, there was gastrectomy and pyloroplasty, but radical mastectomy was still on the list. But later, as more results came in, it became the established procedure to perform simple mastectomy often with radiation therapy. So in 1983, there were only 5,000 radical mastectomies, down from 46,000 every year in 1974. So 1983, I was 3 years out of medical school. I was in my residency. So they were still happening then. And again, that's from the textbook, that's gone. We don't do that anymore. So it's virtually never performed anymore. And it only took about 100 years to get rid of it. How about ulcers? So ulcers are another paradigm. And this is kind of one of my favorites. I love this. So there's a bacteria that causes peptic ulcer disease. How many people knew that? Right? Okay. In the early 20th century, ulcers were believed to be caused by stress and dietary factors. By the way, the bacterium is called Heliobacter pylori. The treatment focused on hospitalization, bed rest, and prescription of special bland foods. Later, gastric acid was blamed for ulcer disease. And then there was surgery, like gastrectomy, vagotomy, pyloroplasty. I still remember one of the procedures we used to do, for taking out someone's stomach, we'll obviously get rid of their gastric ulcers because they won't have a place to have ulcers. Vagotomy is to cut the vagus nerve, the largest nerve in the body. And we just cut it. Well, I didn't. I mean, the surgeon did. I was just holding the spreaders, the retractors. And pyloroplasty is just a way of opening up the stomach, cutting the valve so the stomach empties more freely. So big deal. And in the 1980s, medications came along that block acid production. I'm sure many of you in this room have taken some of these, maybe all of them. Despite this treatment, there was a high recurrence of ulcers. And in 1982, these two Australian physicians, Robin Warren, who's a pathologist, and Barry Marshall, first identified the link between Helicobacter pylori and ulcers, concluding that the bacterium, not stress or diet, causes ulcers. But nobody would believe them. So in 1984, Marshall, the gastroenterologist, said, okay, we're going to run a test on me. So they did endoscopy, and his stomach looked normal. They looked down there with a scope. And then he drank a broth containing H. pylori from a patient who had ulcers. And he thought maybe a year later he might get an ulcer. So there he is. Actually, that is him. Or first picture is somebody else. I don't know who it is. Anyway, I had to illustrate it. But he was surprised that only 3 days later, 3 days after drinking the stuff, he got vague nausea and halitosis that his mother noticed. And on days 5 through 8, he started vomiting. And on day 8, he had another endoscopy which showed massive inflammation of his stomach, gastritis. And a biopsy was done that showed Helicobacter pylori was cultured in his stomach, so meaning it had colonized his stomach. On the 14th day, a third endoscopy was done and showed still a lot of disease. And then he started taking antibiotics, and he got better promptly. And they scoped him again, and everything looked okay. This is what endoscopy looks like on a normal person. Over here on the left, the stomach has got these folds in it, but basically nice and smooth. Over here, you can see this is gastritis. I have to have a picture up there. There's all these white, pussy things lying on the surface of the stomach, and then those eventually lead to ulcers. So his illness and recovery based on a culture of organisms extracted from a patient proved the connection between H. pylori and gastritis, fulfilling Koch's postulates. He's a bacteriologist from the 1800s. And the experiment was published in 1985 in the Medical Journal of Australia, and is among the most cited articles from the journal. So that was a big change in the paradigm for how we treat ulcers. It went from being something that's, oh, it's all in your head, and it's because you're so stressed out, and you should drink a lot of milk and eat cottage cheese, which is what my mother had, the diet she was on, and her father had his stomach actually removed. Now it's treated with 10 days of antibiotics, and it's gone. Treatment of ulcers is now almost exclusively with a short course of medication, and gastric surgery is almost never performed for ulcers unless you're like bleeding out. So there's a little cartoon of what those little guys look like. And here's Robin Warren and Barry Marshall toasting their success. And here they are actually receiving the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2005. Is that cool? He performed the experiment on himself. There was another guy actually who performed the experiment on himself. He put a catheter into his pulmonary artery from his vein. He just passed it under X-ray. It was pretty amazing. That was a long time ago, but I'm not talking about him. Okay, here's another medical paradigm we're going to focus on a little bit. So cardiovascular disease is the biggest killer in this country of men and women, mostly through heart attacks, but also through stroke. And it's caused by what we call atherosclerosis, or hardening of the arteries. It causes stroke, heart attack. It can cause claudication. You go for a walk and you get pain in your legs and you have to stop and you rest, and then the pain goes away and you can walk again. And it can cause erectile dysfunction. It's a systemic disease. It affects arteries everywhere in the body, and therefore every organ. So every organ in your body is affected by atherosclerosis. Now, some are affected more than others. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but I just want to give you a picture of what an artery in the heart would look like, a coronary artery. This is a normal lumen. The white part is where the blood would be flowing, and this little black line here is the endothelial lining. And then this red part is the muscle, because arteries are very muscular. They can contract and relax. This is over on this end is a very diseased coronary artery. You can see it's got a little tiny lumen. What do you think is going to happen when this closes over? Die, heart attack. Actually, you know what? Probably nothing. And you know why? Because that's been there so long this person's body has adjusted by creating collaterals around this very tight narrowing, so that there's already a bunch of basically internal bypasses that have already been created by the body. And so this could be a non-event. Now this person will have angina, so when they walk to the mailbox, they might get chest pain and they have to stop and rest, but they're not going to keel over deads. Now this is the kind of plaque that causes sudden death. And imagine the artery is now turned sideways, or 90 degrees. Now what we're looking at, instead of cross-section, we're looking longitudinal, but this is a plaque that's very shallow. But this is a fresh atherosclerotic plaque that's more like a pimple. It's got kind of pus cells in it. It's got cholesterol and white blood cells, and it's very fragile. Now, if this person had a stress test, it'd probably be normal, because it doesn't cause enough narrowing to limit blood flow to the heart, so they're not going to have symptoms. But what happens if it develops a crack? So they get stressed, they eat a big fatty meal, so whatever reason there's more stretching on this gossamer thin layer of endothelial cells over the top of this, it cracks, you get a little blood clot, the blood clot gets bigger in just the course of minutes. And then you get a windsock phenomenon where the flowing blood just peels it off and it blocks it off completely. Now that is in the background of not having any collateral arteries at all, because this person has not had difficulty with blood flow to that part of the myocardium. And so when this blocks over, that causes a heart attack, because the downstream the downstream muscle from there is going to die. It's going to cause, usually it's a fatal arrhythmia. So when people die from a heart attack, people always say, oh, he died from a massive heart attack. Well, you don't really know that. You just know that his heart stopped, right? And the assumption is if he died, it must have been massive, right? But actually, most people die from an arrhythmia. So that's why it's important to have these, defibrillators around, because an awful lot of people are just in ventricular fibrillation, and you shock them, and their heart starts beating normally because only a little bit of the muscle is dead. Anyway, Dr. Esselstyn was one of my heroes. He likes to talk a lot about endothelial cells. You can see it's this nice little cobblestone appearance to the lining of the artery. It's a single cell layer, and everything you eat or inhale, it ends up in your bloodstream, ends up interacting with the endothelial cells, or really more accurately, the endothelial cells end up interacting with that stuff. So any junk you put in your body ends up affecting these guys, and oftentimes they respond by getting inflamed and creating plaques. So this is a normal artery. It's nice and pink and smooth. Anybody know what artery that is? So this is the abdominal aorta, the big artery goes from your chest down to your pelvis. And these are the branches to the spine, the spinal arteries that come off in pairs. And then there's the celiac axis, the kidney arteries, the renal arteries there, and the superior mesenteric artery. Anyway, it's nice and pink and smooth. Now I'm going to show you another abdominal aorta. This is an abdominal aorta from somebody who has really, really bad atherosclerosis. What does that look like?
Pizza.
Pizza. Good. That is pizza. That's from all the saturated fat and all the junk. Most of the saturated fat in Americans' diets comes from cheese, and most cheese is on pizza. So it's not a bad thought. You can actually see where remember I showed you the celiac axis? This is it trying to get out here. You can barely see where the spinal arteries are coming out. There's a couple up there, but down here they're probably blocked. People who have this kind of process also end up with lots of degenerative change in their spine with lots of disc disease. So so I always ask, what if this stuff were growing on your face? You would not wait till it looked like that, right? You'd be at the doctor if you saw a little tiny ditzel over here, right? But because this is insidious, it's on the inside, it takes decades to happen. You don't know, and you don't know what's happening. It can get very advanced before it becomes symptomatic. And just to compare again, there's the two together. There's nice pink, shiny, and there's covered with plaque. So what is the Esselstyn program? You've heard me talk about that. I mentioned that Barney Creel was the father-in-law of Caldwell Esselstyn. Dr. Esselstyn is a surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic, and he was there for 35 years. He's retired now, former president of the American Association of Endocrine Surgeons. He actually was not a cardiologist. A lot of people get confused about that. He didn't do cardiac surgery. He was just really interested in diet, and the Cleveland Clinic is well known for heart disease. And if you're going to have a heart attack or can have something done on your heart, that's a good place to be. He also has an Olympic gold medal. In 1956, he was in Melbourne, Australia, which is kind of cool. and Bronze Star is an Army surgeon in Vietnam. He was actually on the Yale rowing team. So he and I, we go to the same Yale alumni meetings because I graduated in '76. So I bump into him every 5 years. Anyway, he was also the first recipient of the Benjamin Spock Award for Compassion in Medicine. And son-in-law of Barney Creel, as we mentioned earlier, the innovative breast surgeon we discussed. So what is the plan for eliminating heart disease that Dr. Esselstyn has? Well, foods to include vegetables, lots of greens. He wants you eating greens 6 times a day, before and after every meal, or the equivalent thereof. Legumes, lots of beans and lentils and peas, whole grains, fruit, no nuts or oil. So people say, no oil? What about olive oil? Nope. If you Google no oil, you'll come up with a little video of him going, no oil. And foods to exclude anything with a face or a mother, meat, poultry, fish, or eggs, dairy products, oils, all including the healthy oil. What about olive oil? What about canola oil? Well, they're not as bad as other oils, but no oil is healthy. Refined grains, white flour, white rice, all processed foods and foods with added sugars, and also excluding nuts, although some nuts are probably beneficial for most people. Anyway, this is a guy who named Joe Crow, who actually worked at the Cleveland Clinic with Dr. Esselstyn. In fact, he succeeded him as the chairman of the breast cancer task force. He's 44 when this story takes place. It was Friday in November 1996. I had operated all day. I finished, said goodbye to my last patient, and got a very bad headache. It hit me in a flash. I had to sit down. A minute or two after that, the chest pain started. It radiated up my arm and shoulder and into my jaw. What was happening? Having a heart attack. Where was he? He was at the Cleveland Clinic. What better place to have a heart attack? What I'm trying to figure, they got him over to cardiology. It's probably interesting how he got there, because most people come in through the emergency room. Somehow they had to wheel him over there. And a coronary artery angiogram was performed, and it showed that his problem was inoperable and that a stent was not feasible. Is that good news or bad news? Actually, that's good news, because they didn't do anything to him, and he lived, right? Nowadays, if you're having that situation, they might do an emergency stent, and usually that can be life-saving, but for most purposes, a stent does not prolong life or really help with symptoms. It can be life-saving in the emergency situation, but they left him alone, so he doesn't have any hardware in there now, and he never had surgery. 2 weeks later, he and his wife went to the Esselstyn's house for dinner. They immediately embarked on the Esselstyn plan, and his total cholesterol went from 156 to 89, and his LDL went from 98 to 38. Now, he had pretty good numbers to start with, so he's got, at least he got some other risk factors, because we consider any total cholesterol under 150 or LDL under 80 to be great, and he was kind of close to that. But anyway, this is what his angiogram looked like, and you can see this is the left anterior descending artery. This is in 1996, November, and this part of the artery is normal. This part is very abnormal. You see how it's irregular and narrow, and then he goes back and has another angiogram almost 3 years later, 2.5 years later, and it's normal. This is on diet. Now, this does not happen to everybody. Most people will get better and their plaques will improve if they go on an Esselstyn plan, an excellent diet, which is really just a whole food plant-based diet that's also very low in fat. He was young, and so this was probably mostly inflammatory tissue that was here. But it doesn't matter, because any improvement in an artery is going to dramatically improve flow. Plus, what we're trying to do is avoid that situation, that emergency situation I showed you where the soft plaque that ruptures, which all you're really trying to do is stabilize plaques. And if you can get them stabilized, then you're not likely to have a heart attack. So how fast does the Esselstyn diet work? We don't like doing angiograms, frequently, because they're invasive and they can be risky. So there's another kind of a test you can do. It's called a PET scan, and it's basically a nuclear medicine test where you just inject a little bit of radioactive material in the person's vein, and then you get these beautiful images. So this is, I'm going to start with this is after 3 weeks on the diet. This is normal. This is what's called a long axis view of the left ventricle. Completely normal. Red is good. That means there's a lot of blood flow. But 3 weeks earlier, there's no red down here in the apex of the heart. So this would be called apical ischemia. And these are done while the patient is on a treadmill or after some kind of stress. So this is a really great result, and it happens after 3 weeks. What about this one? This is normal here after 12 weeks. 12 weeks earlier, you can see the lateral wall of the left ventricle. Left ventricle is very ischemic, not much blood flow because there's not good arterial flow. this is almost normal after 6 weeks. There's a little defect down here in the inferior wall of the left ventricle, which is stable, and it's probably an old infarct, and that's never going to get better. But you can see how it was 6 weeks earlier, very ischemic in the septum of the heart and the inferior wall. And again, almost normal after 3 weeks, very abnormal 3 weeks earlier. So things can improve very quickly on a plant-based diet. And it's not just for heart disease. So I've got this, actually I've got some in the back if you want to take home one of these posters for your doctor's office. Ask your doctor if eating a plant-based diet is right for you. It's our spoof on drug ads. And a whole food plant-based diet has side effects. And the side effects may include losing weight without counting calories, reversing type 2 diabetes, lowering cholesterol and blood pressure, reversing heart disease, less inflammation and pain, less reflux, constipation, and irritable bowel, improved erectile function and fewer hot flashes, reduced medication and lower drug costs, more energy, improved sleep, and better mood. So this is our spoof on the drug ad, and those are our side effects. So how do we teach that? How do we get patients to go through a program like this? Or they don't even have to even be our patients. They can just be people who just sign up from the internet. So our 15-day whole food plant-based jumpstart is based on the S system plan, a way of eating that can prevent, treat, and reverse heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and most of the chronic conditions causing so much misery in the world. And I think we've broken $5 trillion in healthcare in the last year. When I first started giving this talk, it was 3.5 trillion. But it's about 85% of that is spent on chronic disease that is avoidable. Not 5. If I told you it was 5%, you'd say, oh, we should do something about that. But it's 85%. It's huge. And that's not just expensive, but it's causing misery. We don't need these diseases. So what is our Jumpstart program? It follows the S system plan, the very low-fat, whole food plant-based diet, or VLF, WFPBD. And again, no oil, no high-fat plant foods, nuts, avocado, olives, or coconuts. And after the Jumpstart, we advise most people to add back in some high-fat plant foods, except for coconut, which is very high in saturated fat. But if people have, and our Jumpstart only lasts 15 days, and I'll show you the kind of results we get in a few minutes. And we tell people, look, you're a grown-up. You can do anything for 2 weeks. So this is our 15-day whole food plant-based Jumpstart. It is certified by the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. There's only a handful of programs that are certified. Ours is one of the few. There's two branches to that certification. There's therapeutic and there's educational. Ours is considered therapeutic, which is the higher level. And we've had nearly 2,700 participants from 44 states and 9 countries. And we've had over 500 clinicians refer patients since we started this in 2018. So here's an example of a patient, somebody with diabetes. I'm sure people in this audience have family members or friends who have diabetes. So this is a 61-year-old male who came in September 2018. His hemoglobin A1C was 13.6, and I'll tell you what that means in a second, but he was not on any medications. He was just recently diagnosed with diabetes. Everybody knows about blood sugar. A normal blood sugar is anything, a fasting blood sugar should be under 100. If you're eating, it should be, if it's not a fasting blood sugar, it might be 125, it might be 150, but if you're fasting, it should be under 100. This means his hemoglobin A1C is a measure of your average blood sugar over the last 3 months. It's really very helpful because blood sugar goes up and down all day long, but you want to know what's the average, if you want to see what kind of control they have. A hemoglobin A1C of 13.6 means his average blood sugar has been 350 for the last 3 months. Remember I said it should be under 100. So he took our September Jumpstart. This is back before the pandemic, and we were doing this in our office. And he began a very low-fat, whole food plant-based diet. By December, his hemoglobin A1C was 6.0. 3 months, he's okay. And now it's 5.4, which is normal. He doesn't have diabetes. If he goes to the doctor, they would say, you don't have diabetes. He would say, but I did. So we're not actually, we don't call this reversal. We call it remission, because we know if he goes back to his old habits, it's going to come back. My wife ran into him in the store in 2020. He's still doing well. His wife's dress size has dropped from 22 to 14. So, we don't get the charge for that. His wife got better too. Not that we charge you much for this, but, it's like nobody gets good credit for good things, bad things that don't happen. Anyway, we checked in again on him last year. He's still doing fine. He sends us cards around the holidays because he's so grateful. Here's another example. 50-year-old woman with chronic kidney disease. And a total cholesterol of 299, which is very high. She goes on the Jumpstart, and on day 15, her total cholesterol was 149. Now this was somebody, when we were doing it so her cholesterol dropped 150 points in 2 weeks. Now, I wouldn't have believed it, except we were doing it right there in our office. We had the finger stick machine. This is before the pandemic when we had to go remote. And we've had other people drop cholesterol actually over 200 points in 2 weeks. Those people started out in the 400s, so it was really high to begin with. But yeah, she dropped 150 points in 2 weeks. Now, what about these guys? These are married experimental subjects. So they're both doctors in the Rochester area. He's an ER doctor. She's a pediatrician. She's the head of pediatrics at one of the major teaching hospitals. He's the president of a couple of hospitals. He came to me, whenever that was, 2019, I think. And he said, Ted, I want to have a big reveal at a big dinner I'm throwing for the health system. And I want to do your jumpstart because I have a very strong family history of heart disease in my family, and I'm worried that I'm going to get heart disease. So I want to see if I can get my cholesterol down. And then I'm going to announce my results at this party. And I said, but what if it doesn't work? You're going to tell everybody. So you're going to follow my instructions. Now, in order for him to get the results in time for this party, he had to actually get his labs run a day early. So he did it on day 14. So here are their results. Here's her results before she started. She's got a total cholesterol of 148 and an LDL of 71, which is very good just to begin. It's very good. So she's already heart attack proof. This number, we like to see people get their total cholesterol under 150 and their LDL under 80. That number comes from the Framingham Heart Study in Framingham, Massachusetts. Almost nobody has ever had a heart attack with numbers like that. And Dr. Esselstyn is the one who came up with the idea of heart attack proof, but he got it from there. So how did she do after 2 weeks on the diet? Well, her total cholesterol dropped to 112, and her LDL dropped to 46. So she's only he started at 187, not a terrible cholesterol, but not great either. I mean, half of heart attacks happen to people whose cholesterol is under 200, and we just tell people to get their cholesterol under 200. Anyway, his LDL was at 126. So on day 14, his total cholesterol dropped to 139, and his LDL dropped down to 83. So I consider him to have made it, we'll just round that down to 80. And that's pretty good, 2 weeks, right? He was thrilled. So was I. I was actually relieved. So anyway, what do we do for our jumpstart? I'm just going to, actually I'm going to skip this slide because we're running out of time. But we basically meet 6 times for 10 hours. And here's what a typical calendar looks like. So this would be typical jumpstart schedule. It starts on day -3, because the whole thing we call it a 15-day jumpstart, but the whole thing takes 18 days. Because we have a day -3 where we get people oriented and prepare them. So there's 2 hours of prep on day -3. And then day 1 is a presentation from 1 to 3 in the afternoon. Day 5, there's a check-in for an hour. Day 8, there's a 2-hour virtual potluck, which is really fun. We used to do the potlucks in our office before the pandemic, and we had to clear everybody out. And it took us forever to clean up the office after everybody left from the potluck. This is so great. There's no cleanup. We just hang up. And then we have a commencement on day 15, and then they go into our whole food plant-based support group or alumni group after that, which we have basically indefinitely. We run all these things on our platform, the learning management system. We call it looks kind of funny. Anyway, this is our community website. We have 2 websites. RochesterLifestyleMedicine.org is our main website where we have information, but this is our community website. It's kind of like a social media platform. We call it the Pale Blue Dot Community. Anybody recognize the Pale Blue Dot illusion? It has to do with Carl Sagan and Earth as a little tiny dot. But if we have time later, I'll talk more about it. But basically, that's where we have our learning management system, and you go into the program, the Whole Food Plant-Based Jumpstart program. If you've ever done a course online, you know that's what it looks like. These are the lessons over on the side. You get an email every morning, and then we meet on those days that I showed you. We meet on the Zoom room. This is just an example of what one of the lessons would look like. And so you can see over here it says "Welcome to Jumpstart." So we do a new cohort every month, and we use Google surveys. We have what's called a business associates agreement with Google. So all of the material that we collect is considered HIPAA compliant. It's medically legal. Not that we have to, because we're not technically a covered organization, but we do put a lot of stress on privacy. I told you about the virtual potluck, where it used to be the cleanup. So this is what it looks like. So patients send us recipes and photos, and then we assemble a virtual cookbook. Actually, that's not true. Now they just put it into the space, and it automatically gets put up online. But these are some examples of what the recipes look like, and they post them like that. So this is Kristen, another great looking recipe. I don't know what's out there. Looks pretty good, I guess. People get creative, make them decorative. And then here's somebody made a whole food plant-based dessert. This is just fruit. So you can see we have a lot of fun when we do it. And this is a graphic that shows our results. If you look over here at total cholesterol, on average, people lose 26 points. But the more you need to improve, the more you will improve. So if your cholesterol is over 240, average cholesterol drop will be 64 points in 2 weeks. So, we always brag about the big ones, like the lady with the 150. And people lose weight too in 2 weeks. Now, our record weight loss is about 22 pounds in 2 weeks. Now, nobody can consume that many calories. So that's somebody who's very overweight to begin with, who has a lot of water to lose, and their body's probably very inflamed. So we'll see people lose 20, 22 pounds, and then other people will feel they'll be envious. Right? Well, I didn't lose that much weight, and we'll say, well, the goal here is to lose 1 or 2 pounds a week. That's it. And if you do that for a year, that's a lot of weight, right? But oftentimes, because their bodies are so inflamed that when they go on this anti-inflammatory diet, they lose a lot of water along with the fat. Again, we talked about this. We teach the Esselstyn compliant eating pattern. It also happens to be great for most other chronic conditions. And I showed you that in that little advertisement for a drug ad. But isn't this diet experimental? How do we even know if it's safe? I mean, really? So I'm going to compare 2 diets here. I'm going to ask you which one you think is safer. Okay? This is the standard American diet. And this is the diet that we teach. Which one do you think is the experiment? Right? This is the experiment we've been performing on our kids, and for the last, 50 or 60 years, we're creating more and more junk food, right? So a few more notes about our whole food plant-based jumpstart. This is kind of what it looks like on screen. Here I am. I'm always dressed up with a white coat and scrubs, and I'm Dr. Veggie. And I'll share a secret with you. I'm allergic to most clothes, and except for scrubs. So that's actually how I got started. And thought, well, I'll just do it anyway. So most new clothes. That's why all my clothes are old.
That's the hardest selling I'm guessing. But anyway, what's really interesting about the two of what we talked about are pending. Most people who've gone to our program were not there until the first one was attended.
In fact, there's a number of people who don't even realize they have arthritis and pain in the phone afterwards, and they say, I didn't realize I joined for bothering you. I'm losing out of bed now. And that's just really kind of very gratifying and also pretty amazing. So we love that. We do need more stories and we need more data, but mostly, well, we need people to get the message out. And that's kind of why we like to talk to groups like you, because this is pretty basic. It's pretty simple. Why are we spending $5 trillion on healthcare in this country and getting such lousy results? You would think we basically spend at least twice as much per person as most other countries on health. And we don't have the highest life expectancy by any means, or the best outcomes. We're like 30th or 35th in terms of life expectancy. So it's pretty terrible. So it's highly scalable. We have a low barrier to entry for doctors and patients. It's enticing to patients. It's really easy. A lot of people say, yeah, 2 weeks, I'd like to find out. Let's see what happens. There's a rapid demonstration of value, and we say you can do anything for 2 weeks. It's fun and supportive. You saw the groups that we meet in. It's affordable. It's $299 for, and of course that doesn't really cover our costs, but we do have donors. So we've given it monthly at least 75 times to about 2,700 people. And it's easy for physicians to order. We have a simple Google form on our website that you can show your doctor or whatever. You can just sign up on your own. You don't need a doctor's referral to do it. If a doctor fills out the referral form, then we contact you or the patient to get you registered. We've had over 500 clinicians around the country have sent their patients. It counteracts misinformation and disinformation. It's also reproducible for research and demonstrations, which I think is really important. It's kind of like, it's like pouring pills out of a bottle. Why should the drug companies have this advantage of being able to do randomized controlled trials? Because, you can either give them a placebo that looks just like the medication, or you can give them the real medication. Well, those randomized controlled trials are considered the gold standard, even if they're demonstrating that something that's not as good for you, like pills, I'm not sure I'm making my point well here. The idea is that most lifestyle things are more powerful than most of the pills that we do, but it's hard to do a randomized controlled trial with diet because you know if you're in the control group. If I give you plastic broccoli, you're going to know that it's not real broccoli, so as opposed to a placebo pill. So we have completed a study, a randomized controlled trial with the Department of Nephrology at U of R, and actually demonstrated that it was safe, right? And plants have a lot of potassium. Well, it turns out that potassium was never a problem for these patients, and most of them actually showed a little bit of improvement in their renal function. So that was recently published. And then in progress, we're working with the rheumatology department at the University of Rochester for psoriatic arthritis. So we're excited about that. I'll just skip through these pretty quickly. Because of Susan Friedman, our director of clinical studies, these are 3 of our publications. We probably got another 4 that have been published in peer-reviewed journals. We've also had posters at a number of conferences, and then I want to brag a little bit. We had the best overall abstract there in 2016. This one didn't win anything. This was the winner Best Professional Abstract 2018, winner Best Professional Abstract 2019. So we make it easy for busy doctors to order. Remember I told you about that. So actually, if you just click up, if they click up here under medical professionals, and that'll take them to this page, the resources, and then they click on that for the referral form, and this form just pops up, and their office staff fills it out, and then we contact the patient and get them enrolled. Again, the Pale Blue Dot community, which I'd love it if people would take a look at. We have an app on the Android and iPhones, and this is another thing that I'm very proud of. We do this lifestyle medicine grand rounds. We're the only organization I'm aware of that does this, where we actually present interesting, challenging cases to a panel of lifestyle medicine experts. You probably recognize Dr. Esselstyn. He was on a panel not that long ago. This is Dr. Thomas Campbell, who's the son of T. Colin Campbell. There's Michael Clapper over there. We've had a lot of really great people do this. And it's, I don't know if anybody's heard of Will Bolsowitz, the fiber doctor, fiber fueled. Anyway, it's incredible what we come up with at these conferences. We run them once a month. They're just an hour, or a little over an hour usually, and we give CME to the doctors who come, and it's free. So if you have a doctor friend or a medical professional you know who would be interested, please send them our way. And then just to throw in a little bit about what else you're doing for the planet when you go on a whole food plant-based diet. So the standard American diet, it takes 2 football fields or about 1.3 acres to feed 1 person a year. Yeah. Whereas on a plant-based diet, those same 2 football fields will feed 14 people. And if everyone in the world ate a plant-based diet, 5 billion football fields worth of land could be returned to forests. Finally, I'm just going to close on an editorial that was in the American Journal of Cardiology in 2022. Are we what we eat? The moral imperative of the medical profession to promote plant-based nutrition. And this is a pretty conservative standard journal, American Journal of Cardiology. And I summarized the abstract for you. The typical Western diet diet high in processed and animal-based foods is nutritionally and ethically problematic. Beyond the well-documented cruelty to animals that characterizes the practices of the factory farming industry, current patterns of meat consumption contribute to medical and moral harm in humans on both an individual level and a public health scale. Animal-based foods promote the mechanisms that underlie chronic cardiometabolic disease, whereas whole food plant-based nutrition can reverse them. Factory farming of animals also contributes to climate change, antibiotic resistance, and the spread of infectious diseases. Do you know that most antibiotics in this country are used in factory farms, not on humans? A societal shift toward more whole food plant-based patterns of eating stands to provide significant health benefits and ethical advantages, and the medical profession has a duty to advocate accordingly. So if all this is true, why hasn't the healthcare system already adopted something so simple, powerful, and inexpensive? Well, we need to market this better. We need more stories. And you can help to change the paradigm and move the Overton window. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience.